I have buttoned the livery of 3 generations, and in all my years at Ravensmoor I learned only one rule worth keeping. A house tells you the truth long before any person in it will. So when the new sentry stopped outside the quiet room on his very first morning and tilted his head a half-inch, the way a man does when a sound is wrong, I knew. I had been polishing the same brass hinge for 40 years to keep myself from hearing that room. He heard it in one day. My name is Alder Penn, and I am the head butler of the house of Ravensmoor, which is to say I am the man who knows where every key hangs and pretends he does not. The quiet room sits at the end of the long gallery, past the portraits of dead stewards, behind a door of black walnut with no handle a guest would recognize. No guard enters it. That is the tradition, older than I am, older than the late Lord himself. A sentry stands his post outside the door, eyes forward, and he does not knock, does not look, does not ask. The room is for the family's accounts and the family's grief, the household whispered, and a guard's business is the threshold, never the chamber. I had repeated that sentence to 100 young men. I believed it the way you believe a thing you have never been allowed to test. The new man was called Thomas Vren. He came to us from the border companies with a record so clean it looked scrubbed, and a stillness that did not look learned. Most young guards stand at attention like men holding their breath. Vren stood like a man who had decided long ago that the world could come to him. I disliked him at once, which is how I know I respected him. "That door, Mr. Penn," he said to me that first morning, not turning his head, his voice pitched only for the 2 of us. "Who keeps the inside of it?" "No one keeps it," I said. "It keeps itself, you keep the hall." "Then why," he said, "does the dust line under the door move at the 3rd hour, and again at the 11th when no one has gone in?" I had no answer that I was willing to say aloud. I told him the floors breathed with the cold, which was the kind of thing a butler says to close a conversation, and I went away with the brass polish stinging my fingers and my heart doing something it had not done in years. I went to the linen press, sat on the stool I keep there for the gout I will not admit to, and I thought about the dust line under a door I had walked past every day of my working life. I will tell you what I had stopped letting myself notice. The accounts of Ravensmoor had been wrong for 2 years, not wrong as a sum is wrong, wrong the way a room is wrong when a painting has been moved an inch. The cellar was ordering wine the cellar did not drink. The stables billed for a farrier who, when I once telephoned to thank him, had never heard of us. The widow's pensions, the house keeps 6 old servants' widows on a quiet purse. A kindness the late Lord set down in his own hand had been reduced by a clerk's stroke to 4, and the names of the 2 struck off had been Marin and Iris, both of whom I had served beside, both of whom were now told in a letter under the house seal that the fund had run dry. The fund had not run dry. I had carried the late Lord's instruction to my chest like a coal for 30 years, and someone, somewhere behind that black walnut door, had blown it out. I knew who. That is the part that shames me. I knew, and I had folded the knowing into a napkin and put it away. The man who held the accounts now was Mr. Corwin Hale, the controller of the house, a soft-spoken man with very white cuffs who had arrived after the late Lord's death to set the figures in order. He had set them in order all right. He had set them in his order. He kept the quiet room. The tradition that no guard might enter it had been, in my day, a courtesy to the family's privacy. In Hale's day it had become a wall. And the family, the young Lady Alina Ravensmoor, 19 and grieving and not yet sure which end of a house to hold, signed what Hale put before her, because Hale spoke gently and the figures were long and her father was 3 months dead. So you see why I told the new sentry that the floors breathed with the cold. The truth was a fire, and I was too old and too comfortable to carry a fire. But Vren had heard the room. That night I could not sleep, and a sleepless butler is a dangerous animal, because he walks the halls he is paid to know. I came down the long gallery at the 11th hour, my candle low, telling myself I wanted only to check the gallery windows for the draft. The sentry's post outside the quiet room was empty. The night watch had not yet relieved itself, a gap of perhaps 10 minutes that the household rota left like a held breath. And in that gap, the black walnut door stood open the width of a hand, and a thin blade of lamplight lay across the gallery floor like a dropped knife. I should have walked on. 40 years of walking on stood at my shoulder and told me to walk on. Instead I looked. Mr. Hale was inside, at a writing desk I had never seen, under a green-shaded lamp. He was not grieving and he was not keeping the family's accounts. He had a long ledger open before him, a second ledger beside it, and he was copying figures from the true book into the false one, or the false into the true. I could not at that distance tell which was which, only that there were two of them where the house had always believed there was one. His white cuffs were turned back. His face, which in the daylight wore the careful blandness of a man who had never raised his voice, was naked and quick and pleased. He looked up, not at me. I was a shadow beyond a candle, and old men in nightshirts are below the notice of clever men. He looked at the door and his hand moved, and he closed it without rising, the way you close a drawer on something you do not want a draft to disturb. The blade of lamplight vanished. The gallery went dark. I stood there a long moment with my own pulse loud in my ears. 2 ledgers. I had not imagined the wrongness. I had only declined to name it. There was the true book, the one the house lived by, and there was the book Lady Eleanor signed, and the difference between them was a wine cellar that drank nothing, a farrier who did not exist, and 2 old widows told to go hungry under a dead man's broken word. I went back up the stairs so quietly that I frightened myself. And at the turn of the landing, where the great window looks down on the forecourt, I found Thomas Vren standing in the dark, off his shift, out of his coat, simply standing, his eyes on the gallery below. "You saw," he said. "It was not a question." "I saw an old man's tired eyes," I told him, which was a lie, and we both knew it was a lie, and he let me keep it for one more breath. "The dust moves at the 3rd hour and the 11th, he said, "because that is when Mr. Hale goes in, and Mr. Hale is the only man in this house who walks in his stocking feet so the floor will not announce him. A man who has nothing to hide lets the floor do its work." He looked at me then, full on, and there was no accusation in it, only a kind of terrible patience. "You know what is in that room, Mr. Penn. I can see it on you like a stain. The question I have is small. When the truth tries to come out of that door, and it will, things like that always do, will you and I be standing in its way, or will we be standing for it?" I did not answer him. An honest man, faced with a question he is afraid to answer truly, will always find a clock to point at, and I pointed at 1. "The night watch is late," I said. "You should be at your post." And I went to my bed, where I did not sleep, and I lay there ashamed of the relief I felt at being given an order I could obey instead of a question I could not. But a thing had changed in the house, and I felt it the way you feel weather coming. Vren had decided something. He did not say it again, and he did not press me, and that was the worst of it, because a man who argues with you can be argued down, but a man who has simply made up his mind and gone quiet is a tide. Here is what he did, and I watched him do it, and only later did I understand the shape of it. He stood his post. That was all at first. The rota gave the quiet room to 4 sentries in rotation, 2-hour watches around the clock, and Vren began, without a word to anyone, to trade his shifts so that he held the 3rd hour and the 11th. He did it by favors, taking the dawn cold off one man, the supper hour off another, the long dull mid-afternoon off a third, until the 2 watches that mattered were his, and no one had noticed they had given them away. A butler notices such things. I noticed. I said nothing, because saying something would have meant admitting I knew why. And so at the 3rd hour, when Mr. Hale came down the gallery in his stocking feet with the green-shaded lamp's key warm in his palm, he found, where he had always found, a young man staring dutifully at nothing. Thomas Vren, eyes forward, rifle at his shoulder, motionless as the walnut door itself, and entirely, attentively awake. Hale was too clever to be clumsy about it. The first night he simply did not go in. He walked the length of the gallery as though inspecting the windows, turned, walked back, gave the sentry a controller's small nod, and went up to his rooms with his key unused. The second night the same. The third night he stopped in front of Vren and made conversation, the gentle kind, the kind that is all teeth under the gum. "You're new," Hale said. "Yes, sir." "You hold this post a great deal. The others tell me you ask for it." "It's a quiet post, sir. Suits me." "Quiet?" Hale tasted the word. "You know the tradition of this room, of course. No guard goes in. It is a delicate matter, the family's private grief, the late lord's papers. We are all of us very careful of it." He let his eyes rest on Vren's, looking, I think, for the flinch that tells a clever man he has found the soft place. A guard who understood that would understand, too, that what he stands beside is none of his concern. His concern is the hall. Do we understand each other? "Perfectly, sir," said Vren. "My concern is the hall, and the door is in the hall." It was nothing. It was 8 words. But I was polishing a sconce 20 feet down the gallery, and I saw Mr. Hale's white cuff go very still on the head of his cane, and I understood that the soft-spoken man had just been told, courteously, by a young soldier with no rank and no money and no name in the house, that he was being watched. Hale smiled and said something about the cold, and went up to bed with his key unused for the 3rd night running. He did not go into the quiet room for 9 days. You would think that a relief. It was the opposite. Because Mr. Hale was a man who balanced his theft the way other men balance their checkbooks, nightly and to the penny, and 9 nights kept out of his ledgers was 9 nights of figures he could not adjust before the quarter-day audit, when the house's outside accountant came up from the city to sign the books. I knew the audit was coming. Hale knew it better. And a cornered clever man does not flee, he changes the board. The first thing he changed was me. He summoned me to his office, all warmth and white cuffs, and told me the house was grateful for my long service, and that perhaps, given my age and my health, he had heard about the gout I will not admit to, it was time to think of a cottage and a pension and a long rest by a window. He said it kindly. He said it the way you put a cat out at night, gently and without looking at it twice. And I understood that I was being moved off the board because I was the only man in the house old enough to remember what the widow's purse was supposed to hold, and a witness who has been pensioned to a far cottage is a witness who does not appear at an audit. I went back to the linen press and sat on my gout stool and was, I confess, very near to taking the cottage. I am not a brave man. I am a careful one, which is a different and lesser thing. I had a quiet retirement in front of me and a fire I was too old to carry behind me, and the easiest sentence in the world rose up in me. It is not my room to keep. The second thing Hale changed was the rota. He could not be seen to single out one sentry. That would say too plainly that the sentry frightened him. So he reorganized the whole guard, for efficiency, and in the new scheme Tomas Vren was assigned away from the quiet room entirely, to the cold north gate, the post no one wants, the post from which a man can see nothing of the long gallery at all. It was done by the book. It was signed and sealed and perfectly proper. By the morning of the quarter-day eve, the door of black walnut would stand watched by a pliable boy of 19 who owed Hale his place, and Mr. Hale would have one undisturbed night to make his 2 ledgers agree before the accountant's pen came down. That was the night I stopped sitting on my stool. I found Vren at the north gate at dusk, his breath smoking, the lamplight from the house very far behind him, and I will tell you that he looked neither surprised nor sorry. "He moved you," I said. "He did." "You knew he would." "I hoped he would," Vren said, and at my look he almost smiled. "Mr. Penn, a man who has done nothing wrong does not rearrange 100 shifts to put one soldier in the cold. He has told the whole house where the wrong is. He has drawn the arrow on the door himself. The only thing he has bought is 1 night, and 1 night is only enough if no honest man uses it." He looked at me, the cold making his eyes bright. "I cannot stand that post tomorrow. They will not let me near it." but the tradition that keeps a guard out of that room. Who set it down, Mr. Penn? Whose hand? The late Lord's, I said. And who keeps the late Lord's hand now? Who holds his papers, his seals, his true instructions? I felt the cold go through my coat. The controller, I said. Mr. Hale. No, said Vren very quietly. You do. You told me so yourself the first morning, though you did not hear yourself say it. You said the room keeps itself, but you are the man who knows where every key in this house hangs and pretends he does not. He let that sit between us in the dark. I can stand in the cold and be a witness, but there is one man in Ravensmoor who can walk down that gallery tonight and not be stopped by any tradition, because the tradition is his to read. I am only asking whether he will. I went back into the warm house with that question in my chest like a swallowed ember, and I will not pretend to you that I went bravely. I went the way an old man goes anywhere slowly, with one hand near the wall. But I went. The trouble was that the tradition Vren had named was real, and I had spent my life inside it. No guard enters the quiet room. The unwritten companion to that rule, the one no one said because no one needed to, was that no servant entered it either, only the family, and the controller who held the family's accounts. For the head butler to be found in that chamber at night was a dismissible thing, a shameful thing, the kind of thing Mr. Hale could shape, with 3 soft sentences to Lady Eleanor, into proof that old Penn's mind had gone and the cottage could not come soon enough. If I went in and found nothing I could carry out into the light, I would have spent the last coin of my 40 years' good name on a draft under a door. So I did not go in to look, I went in to take. I knew where the keys hung. Of course I did. I had said so without meaning to the first morning. There is a board in the butler's pantry behind a hinged panel of false books, and on it hang the keys to every lock the house owns, in an order only I have kept, and among them, 3rd row, 4th peg, where it had hung untouched and unremarked for 2 years, was a small flat key of an old pattern that opened the black walnut door. Mr. Hale carried its twin. He did not know I had the other. He had never thought to ask the butler what the butler knew, which was his single great mistake, and it was the mistake of every clever man I have outlasted. They count the money and forget to count the servants. I waited until the house had gone fully down, past the 11th hour, into the dead trough of the night when even the clever sleep. I left my candle behind. A candle in that gallery would have been a bell rung in every quiet room, and I went along the wall in the dark, counting the portraits of the dead stewards by the cold of their frames under my fingers, until I came to the door with no handle a guest would know. The pliable night sentry, Hale's boy, was at the post. He was 19 and he was asleep on his feet the way the young can be, chin sunk, the rifle a crutch. I did not wake him. God forgive me, I was grateful for his weakness. It was the only thing in that house weaker than my courage. The little flat key turned with a sound like a held breath let go. Inside, the quiet room was smaller than the tradition had made it in my mind, and colder and entirely ordinary, a writing desk, 2 chairs, a green-shaded lamp, shelves of the late Lord's bound accounts going back further than my service. For 30 years I had imagined it as a chapel. It was a counting house. I lit the lamp with the door shut behind me and my heart going like a snared bird, and I found, in the 3rd minute of looking, exactly what Vren and I had known I would find, and it was worse than either of us had said aloud. There were 2 ledgers in the locked lower drawer, and the drawer was not even locked, because Mr. Hale had grown so easy in his theft that he had stopped fearing the only man who held the other key. The first ledger was the one Lady Eleanor signed each quarter, fair and clean, the figures all in their proper rows, the house solvent and sober, and a little poorer each year in a way that looked like the times and not like a thief. The second ledger was the true one. In the true one the wine was never ordered and the farrier never paid, and the widow's purse stood exactly as the late Lord had said it. 6 names, 6 small honest sums. And from that true purse, quarter by quarter, A hand I would have known anywhere had drawn the difference into a private column at the back, headed only with the initials CH, and the difference, totaled across 2 years, was a sum that made me sit down in the controller's own chair. But the ledger was not the worst of it. Folded into the back of the true book, in the late Lord's own hand, on the late Lord's own paper, under the late Lord's own seal, I knew the seal. I had carried it to him 1,000 times, was the instruction itself. The widow's fund is a debt of honor and not of law, the late Lord had written, in the careful hand of a man writing the last decent thing he means to do. It cannot be enforced by any court, and so it must be kept by the conscience of this house. Let no controller reduce it. Let no quarter pass it by. Marin of the South Kitchen and Iris, who kept my mother's rooms, are to be paid first, before the wine, before the horses, before me. So long as Ravensmore stands, they eat. He had named them. He had named the 2 women Hale had struck off. And he had given the keeping of his conscience not to the controller, but, in the line below, I read it 3 times, there in the cold with the lamp shaking in my hand, to the household, to the servants of long standing, to whoever among them was honest enough to remember. He had foreseen the thief, and he had foreseen me, and he had trusted that some old man who knew where the keys hung would one night find the courage he had not seen in him in life. I do not weep easily. I had not wept at the late Lord's funeral, where it would have been seemly. I wept in the quiet room over a column of figures, alone, in the dead of the night, the way you weep when a dead man you served 40 years reaches out of his own handwriting and asks you, gently, what took you so long? And then I heard the floor in the gallery announce a foot. Not the night sentry's, his was a young, careless tread, and I would have welcomed it. This was the soft, deliberate, stockinged step of a man who walked so the floor would not betray him, and it was coming down the long gallery toward the door with no handle, at an hour Mr. Hale had no honest reason to be awake. I doused the lamp. I had time to do that and nothing else. I stood in the black of the quiet room with the true ledger pressed flat to my chest under my coat, and the late Lord's sealed instruction folded inside my shirt against my skin, an old man in a forbidden room with the thief's own footfall 3 yards off, and I understood with a cold and total clarity that there was no clock left in the world for me to point at. The little flat key was still in the lock on the inside where I had left it. His twin was in his hand on the other side. I heard it scrape the wards once, twice, and find them blocked by mine and stop. And in the stillness that followed I heard Mr. Hale, the soft-spoken man with the very white cuffs, say, in a voice with all the gum stripped off it at last, "Who is in my room?" I said nothing. An old butler's whole training is in saying nothing, and now at last it served me. I stood with my back to a shelf of the late Lord's accounts, and I breathed through my mouth so the dark would not hear me, and I held the true ledger to my heart, and I let him talk. "It is my room," Hale said, more quietly, talking himself down off the edge of his own fear, finding the gentle voice again, fitting it back on like a glove. "No one comes here. No one but the family and I, so you are the boy let, is it? You've let someone in, or you've come in yourself snooping, and now you're afraid to answer. Open the door, let, and we'll forget it, and you'll keep your place. Don't, and I'll have your place and your character with it by breakfast. The choice is yours, and it expires in 10 seconds. He thought the young sentry had come in. He did not even now think of me. To Mr. Hale I was a coat on a peg, a thing that brought the tea. The idea that the butler held the other key had never crossed the floor of his mind. And that mistake, his great mistake, the one I have told you he shared with every clever man, was about to be made larger, because the answer that came down the gallery was not mine and was not the boy's. "There is no one named Let at this post tonight, sir." The voice was level, carrying a wake. "There is no one at this post at all. Your sentry is asleep on his feet 10 yards behind me, and I have taken his watch off him so he won't be blamed for what happens next." It was Thomas Vren. He should have been at the cold north gate. He had been assigned there, signed there, sealed there, locked out of the gallery by a rota Mr. Hale had built with his own hand for exactly this night. And yet here he was in the dark of the long gallery between the thief and the only stair down, and I understood in a rush what he had done. He had let himself be moved. He had stood the cold for an hour to be seen standing it, and then off the rota, off his post, off the book entirely, a soldier acting on nothing but the thing the late Lord had written about, the conscience of the house. He had come back through the dark to the door no guard may enter, and he had planted himself in front of it. Not to go in, to stand, to be a witness with a face and a name in a place the records said he could not be. "You're off your post," Hale said, and the gentleness was gone again. "You've abandoned the north gate. That's a dismissal. That's the brig." "Yes, sir," said Vren. "I have abandoned the north gate. You'll want to write that down. You'll want to write down the hour, too, the dead of the quarter-day eve, and the place, the door to the room no guard may enter, and the fact that the controller of the house was found at it with a key in his hand at this hour, trying to get into a chamber he tells everyone is full of the family's private grief. Write it all down, sir. Make it a long report. The longer the better. Because every line you write to bury me is a line that says, in your own hand, where you were tonight and what you were so very anxious to reach. I have served clever men and I have served cruel ones and a few who were both, and I have learned the sound a clever man makes when he realizes the board has turned under him. It is not a shout. It is a silence with a texture to it. Mr. Hale made that silence on the far side of the black walnut door, and into it, very softly, Tomas Vren went on. "You can take the boy's place from him, sir, and mine. You can take Mr. Penn's when you find he's the one inside. Yes, I know he's in there. I sent him. The key on the inside is his, and it is older and better cut than yours, and it will hold your wards till morning. You can take all three of us off the books by breakfast. But the accountant comes up from the city at noon. And here is the small thing you cannot move, sir, that no rota and no dismissal can touch. There are 2 ledgers in that room, and there is a letter in the dead lord's own hand and seal, and they are no longer in your drawer. They are against an honest man's chest behind that door. You spent your one undisturbed night, sir. You spent it standing in a hallway threatening servants, and you cannot get in to fix your figures, because, for once in the history of this house, there is a guard in front of this room who will not stand aside." The key scraped the wards a 3rd time hard, the way a frightened man does a thing he already knows will fail. Then I heard Mr. Hale's stockinged feet take 1 step back, and another the small careful retreat of a man recalculating in the dark. And I heard him say, to Vren, to me, to the house, to the dead lord, I could not tell which, in a voice gone thin and reasonable and pleading all at once, "You don't understand the figures. No one will. They're complicated. It's 2 years of complicated work, and a soldier and a butler will stand in a courtroom, and a clever man from the city will tie them in knots inside an hour. You'll lose your places for nothing. For nothing. Open the door and let us be sensible men." And from the dark of the room where I stood with a dead man's conscience folded against my skin, I found at last that I had a clock to point at after all, and it was the only honest clock in the house. "It is past 3 in the morning, Mr. Hale," I said, and I heard him go rigid at the sound of the butler's voice from inside his own room, the coat on the peg speaking, the thing that brought the tea, naming him in the dark. "The accountant comes at noon. You have 9 hours. And I have the book you keep at this hour, and the book you let the lady sign, and the letter that says, in the late lord's own hand, that Marin of the south kitchen and Iris who kept his mother's rooms eat before the wine and before the horses and before him." My voice did not shake. After 40 years of saying nothing, it was a strange and steadying thing to hear it say the truth. "I am not a clever man, sir. I cannot tie a thing in knots, but I do not need to. I need only carry 3 pieces of paper down a staircase at noon and put them in the right hand. That is a butler's whole skill, carrying a thing to the right person at the right hour. I have done it for the late lord for 30 years. I will do it for him once more." There was a long silence on the far side of the door. I have wondered since what passed through Mr. Hale's mind in it, whether he weighed the brig and the city and the years he might be made to answer for, whether he thought of running, whether some last soft-cuffed corner of him reached for a clever sentence and found, for the first time in 2 years, that there was not one. What he did was the only thing left to a man who has been told plainly that the night is over. He went away. I heard his stockinged feet retreat down the gallery, past the sleeping boy, past Thomas Vren, who did not move to stop him and did not need to, and up the far stair to his rooms, where, I learned later, he spent the dark hours not in flight, but in the worse labor of writing letters he would never send and burning others, the small fires of a man tidying a life he can feel ending. I did not come out of the quiet room until the gallery windows had gone from black to the iron gray of a winter dawn. When I did, Vren was still there. He had stood the whole night in front of the door he was forbidden to enter, off every book in the house, a soldier guarding a room by guarding the truth that had come out of it. He looked at the shape of the ledger under my coat, and he did not ask to see it, and that was its own kind of honor. He had stood for the thing without ever needing to hold it. "You came back from the North Gate," I said. "I never went to it," he said. "I stood the first cold hour where they could see me go, and then I came back along the servants' stair in the dark. A post is a place a man is told to stand, Mr. Penn. A duty is a place he stands when no one tells him to." He shifted the rifle on his shoulder, the first ordinary movement I had seen him make in hours. "You held the door. That was the harder watch. I only had the cold. I will tell you the rest quickly, the way the morning told it. The accountant came up from the city at noon, a dry, precise man named Mr. Ashby with spectacles and no interest in the house beyond its sums, and he was shown, as he was every quarter, into the small library where Lady Alina waited to sign the books. Mr. Hale was there, white-cuffed, composed, the gentleness fitted back over the long night's ruin, with the fair ledger open and his pen uncapped. He had decided, I think, to brazen it, to let me try, the old fool, to lay my papers before a clever city man and watch them be tied in knots, exactly as he had promised. And I came in with the tea. That is the truth of it, and I am not ashamed of it. I came in as I had come into that room 10,000 times, with the tray and the good cups, the butler doing the thing the butler does beneath notice. I set the tray at Lady Alina's elbow, and beside the cup where a lesser man might have flung down an accusation, I laid 3 things, square and quiet. The fair ledger Hale kept for her hand, the true ledger he kept for the dead of the night, and the late lord's sealed letter in his own hand, unfolded so the seal showed. "My lady," I said, "before you sign, your father left an instruction for this hour. I have only now been able to find it. I beg your pardon that it took me so long." She was 19 and grieving and unsure which end of a house to hold, but she was her father's daughter, and she read. She read the letter first, and her hand went to her mouth at the 2 names in it, Marin and Iris, the women who had carried her as a baby. Then she read the 2 ledgers side by side, the fair and the true, the wine never drunk and the farrier never paid, and the private column at the back marked CH. And Mr. Ashby the accountant, who had no interest in the house but a great and professional interest in 2 sets of books that did not agree, drew the false ledger to himself with 1 dry finger, and went very still in the way that clever, honest men go still when they have caught a clever, dishonest one. Mr. Hale began to speak. He was good, I will grant him that to the end. He spoke of complexity, of provisional entries, of an old butler's confusion and an old lord's failing memory, of the regrettable necessity of pensioning men whose minds had gone, and he reached, smoothly, for the soft sentence that had ruled this house for 2 years. "Mr. Hale," said Lady Alina, and I had never heard her interrupt anyone in her life. She was holding her father's letter in both hands. "Whose hand is this?" "My lady." "Whose hand," she said, "and whose seal?" He had no answer that was not a confession, and so he gave none, and the silence he made then was the last and largest of all his silences, and it filled the small library to the ceiling. Mr. Ashby quietly closed both ledgers, one atop the other, and said that the audit would not be signed today, and that certain figures would want explaining to people whose business such things properly were. Mr. Hale left Ravensmoor before dark, not in irons that came later, and was the law's affair and not mine to tell, but on his own feet, with 2 bags and his very white cuffs. Down the drive he had bled for 2 years, and not one soul of the household came out to see him go. That in a great house is the loudest farewell there is. The widow's purse was made whole that same week, 6 names, 6 honest sums, paid first before the wine and the horses, as a dead man had written it must be. Marin of the South Kitchen got a letter under the house seal that unsaid the cruel one, and Iris, who was failing by then, got a visit from Lady Eleanor herself, which I am told she spoke of every day until the end. I carried neither letter. A younger footman did. A butler learns late to let the right things be carried by other hands. They never did away with the tradition of the quiet room. I expected they would. I expected the house to fling that door wide forever after what had hidden behind it. But Lady Eleanor, who turned out to hold her end of the house very well indeed, decided otherwise. The room is still the room no guard enters. A sentry still stands his post outside the black walnut door, eyes forward, and does not knock, does not look, does not ask. The difference is small, and it is everything. The door is no longer locked from the inside by a thief, and the man who stands beside it now stands there knowing, as Thomas Vren taught us all to know, that a guard's business may be the threshold, but a guard's duty, when the house cannot see, is the truth on the other side of it. Vren was offered the captaincy of the house guard for what he did. He declined it. He asked instead to keep the post outside the quiet room, the 3rd hour and the 11th, and Lady Eleanor, who understood him better than I did at first, granted it. He stands there still. And I, who am too old now for the long gallery, sit in a good chair by a window, not a far cottage, but a near one in the house's own grounds, with a view of the forecourt and a keyboard I no longer keep. And I think about the morning a young man tilted his head a half-inch at a door I had walked past for 40 years, and heard the one thing I had trained my whole life not to hear. I told you at the start that a house tells you the truth long before any person in it will. I have changed my mind about only one word of it. A house does not tell the truth. A house holds it in a quiet room behind a door no one may enter, and it waits, sometimes for years, sometimes for a generation, for one man to stand still long enough and honest enough to let it out. The man who does not move is not the man with nothing in him. He is the man holding the door for the truth, until the truth is ready to walk through it on its own 2 feet. I served 40 years and never understood that. A soldier taught it to me in a single winter, without raising his voice, and I will keep it now, the way the late Lord asked his house to keep a promise by conscience, because no court can make me, and so it must be kept by me or by no one at all.